You're listening to Big World Network.
Phineas Frakture and the Dolomites, Episode 1. Written by Joseph Gatch. Read by Michael Young. Dolomites. The name alone instilled fear in the hearts of the most seasoned soldiers. Denizens of the underground, lurking in sewers and tunnels beneath the city of New York, they traveled in groups of 4, and if you ever saw more than that, you'd better run for your life. They were hulking, lumbering beings dressed in environmental suits. No one alive knew what they really looked like. Those who found out never lived long enough to tell. Though slow, they tenaciously pursued their quarry until they dragged him back into the underground. Always men. They never took women or children. No one knew why, and no one was ever foolish enough to follow to try and find out. It was said that when the Dolomites first appeared and took their victims, a mob of over 50 upstanding New York citizens followed them down. Those 50 were never seen again. The name Dolomites was derived from the sound their breathing apparatus made, a wheezing "dolo" as they breathed whatever gas was in the monstrous tanks they carried on their backs. And they only came out at night. Parents used the term "dolonite" to scare the children from staying out too late. Later, the government would proclaim nights likely to bring an appearance of the creatures as a dolo night as well. Eventually the term was bastardized into their name, and rang out as a warning when one or more was sighted. A plague upon the city, there seemed no hope to cure the disease that grew under the streets. It was only a matter of time before it ruled above as well. "Pin?" The 3-year-old girl, Isabella, watched as her older brother stopped playing with his wooden soldier, his head cocked to the side, listening to the sounds of the street. But there were no sounds, she noticed. No sound of the steel hooves of the horse-drawn carriages, no animated banter of the neighbors as they loitered in the streets in the summer heat. "Pin?" she repeated again. 5-year-old Phineas Frakture slowly stood up. He heard a bell from somewhere in the street, as footsteps pounded up the staircase. The mother burst into the room with a frightened expression on her face. "Hurry!" she hissed in a whispered tone. "Into the space now! Be quiet about it!" The siblings moved quickly, knowing the drill from past performances. A ladder was pulled down from the ceiling just beyond their door in the hall, and they hastily clambered up and shut the latch as their mother put the ladder back in place. Phineas cracked the edge of the hatch and peered out through the slit. Below, he saw his mother rush back downstairs to the parlor, dousing lights as she went. He could see the outline of his father, placing a barricade in the front of the house door. They whispered as they went, making sure there was nothing missed. The front door trembled, stopping them in their tracks. Father, tossing all caution aside, yelled for Mother to go. Hesitant at first, she turned and bolted up the staircase again, as Father braced against the door. He was thrown clear as something crashed into it. Phineas could see the oaken door bow from the pressure exerted upon it from the other side. "Hurry!" Father called up the stairs. But at that moment Mother appeared at the top, holding a box which she already had open. Surprisingly, with her hands trembling and the unholy pounding upon the door, she had the contents ready for Father as he came up the stairs. She slapped the revolver into his outstretched hand as the front door exploded into 100 shards. She slapped the revolver into his outstretched hand as the front door exploded in 100 shards. Stunned, Father slipped as he turned to face the intruders, falling a couple steps toward the bottom. A red lantern, mounted upon a gargantuan helmet, swept the entryway until it settled upon the man. The house became unnervingly quiet for a few seconds, and then a breather mask made the sound men feared most. Gunshots followed it. Phineas watched in abject horror as the bullets sparked off the helmet of the Dolomite. All 6 had hit, but did nothing to slow the monster. His father drew the gun in a hopeless gesture of defense and began scrambling backwards up the stairs. A scream quickly followed as a hook slammed into his right shin, pinning him to the stair. It happened so quickly, though so slowly in the young boy's eyes. Another scream followed, that of his mother, as she watched the Dolomite rip the hook from Father's leg, and then grab the wounded appendage with its other hand. Behind him, Phineas realized that his sister had also begun screaming in fear. The boy shut the opening and pulled his sister to the corner, holding her to him and cupping his hand over his mouth so they would not be discovered. Below, their mother continued wailing, helpless to save her husband, who was being slung over the beast's shoulder like a rag doll. Its work finished, the Dolomite lumbered back out the doorway, leaving the house one occupant shy. The children heard their mother's screams for help, which went on for what seemed like hours. But when the Dolomite had come, help never did. "20 years later. Phineas Frakture, sir, are you to tell me that you would not take up arms against an enemy such as the Queen? That you would stay here, hidden in the classroom, while your countrymen became heroes?" A low murmur rolled across the classroom at the question. Everyone knew the professor's stance on the military, but this tried-and-true tactic was always guaranteed to wash away any thought of a weekend assignment. Turning to the chalkboard, his weapon of choice clutched in his hand, Professor Phineas Frakture pointed the stick of calcium carbonate at each student until it came to rest upon the perpetrator. "Mr. Wellwood, it is funny how you stay so quiet, so unassuming, until the very final moments of the class, and then you pounce with the speed and stealth of a floundering wildebeest." The class chuckled at their mate's failure, and the professor continued. "But, as you never seem tired of hearing it, no, I would not go to war." Wellwood crossed his arms in mock triumph and smiled as the professor began to pace. "It is much better to live long as a coward than to be struck down in your prime as a hero. Why would anyone want to give up their lives for a cause that has nothing to do with them, while the so-called leaders of our nation sit back in their comfortable chairs, clapping and yelling, 'Bravo! Good play!' in the safety of their strongholds, as you lay dying in a field of horse manure? I do not see that as a fitting end for one such as I. You, Wellwood, may die wherever you choose. I will stay here in the safety of the classroom, trying to teach the youth of our nation that science is the key to our longevity, not war. Now, I know that many of you see science as a means to war. Lord knows that many good inventions have been twisted into killing machines. However," Frakture's voice rose and his pacing increased. The students lived for these shows. Professor Frakture was famous for his tirades all across campus. "There are instances where science has prevented wars. Imagine, if you will, what would have happened to this great nation if slavery had not been abolished and the automaton had not been invented. Historians have already surmised that this country would have torn itself apart in a civil war, sending millions to their deaths. But because of one little thought, one person asking, 'What if?' we now live in a society that is catered to by machines instead of slaves." He glared at each student in turn, his dark brown eyes peering out from behind unruly hair. "Yes, I gladly call myself coward, but that is not the issue here. No. What really is on your minds is how on earth am I going to write a 20-page composition on Babbage's thinking computer, and how he was a dolt for not including a coffee percolator. Now, away with you before I add another 20 for trying to distract me." In a collective groan, the students picked up their packs and shuffled out the door.
You're listening to Big World Network.